The challenge begins. Across the vastness of the galaxy, a message was broadcast to every species, every corner of the known universe. It was the kind of message that sent chills down the spine of even the bravest warriors. This wasn't just another war or battle. It was a test. The universal trial had begun, and no one could escape it. In the heart of the galaxy, on an ancient and mysterious planet, the trial was to be held. The alien race known as the Zathuri were the ones to create this challenge centuries ago. They were ancient, powerful, and cold-hearted. Their technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever seen. For every species in the galaxy, it was a chance for survival, or a one-way ticket to extinction. The message was simple, yet terrifying. Only the strongest will survive, fail, and be wiped from the universe. On every planet, in every star system, species were preparing. Their leaders held meetings, gathered troops, and prepared their finest warriors. The exhilarating, a massive reptilian species, known for their speed and strength, sharpened their claws and tested their weapons. The Korath, a race of skilled engineers and tacticians, reviewed their intricate plans and technology. The Vrok, a peaceful but highly intelligent species, readied their minds, preparing to solve whatever puzzles the trial might throw at them. The fear was palpable. The trial was said to be impossible. The planet where it would take place was filled with unknown dangers, deadly creatures, toxic landscapes, and traps meant to test every sense of survival. No one had ever succeeded in completing the trial, no one except one species. Far from the other races, aboard a small but efficient fleet, the humans, Deathworlders, prepared for their journey. Unlike the other species, they didn't seem afraid. The humans weren't worried about what lay ahead. They had faced war, death, and survival on their home planet for centuries. Earth, their planet, was a death world to many other species in the galaxy, filled with predators, environmental dangers, and extreme conditions that had shaped humanity into the survivors they were. As their ships soared toward the trial planet, the humans gathered in their quarters, preparing for the unknown. But instead of tense conversations or fearful glances, there was laughter. They joked and smiled as if they were about to embark on a grand adventure. Not the universe's deadliest test. Captain Ethan Walker, the leader of the human contingent, stood on the deck of the flagship, looking out at the dark void of space. He was tall, with short cropped hair and a strong, calm expression. He wasn't afraid. No, he was excited. This was a challenge, and humanity had never backed down from one. They don't know what's coming, Captain Walker said to his first officer, Lieutenant Harper, as they watched the stars flicker by. Harper smiled, her eyes glowing with the same fire. They'll learn soon enough. We've got a lot to teach them. Ethan turned and glanced at the crew behind them. Soldiers, engineers, scientists, all of them were human, and all of them were ready. No one spoke of the danger they faced because they knew that fear had no place on this mission. Their planet had taught them that much. Earth had been a death world for centuries, and they had learned to survive everything it could throw at them. From the harsh winters to the deadly wildlife, humans had never been the ones to back down. As the fleet approached the planet, their ships entered the atmosphere. The trial planet was barren, covered with jagged rocks, high mountains, and dark forests. The clouds above were thick, swirling like a storm, with no clear indication of what was coming. The humans landed in an open area, surrounded by the silence of the strange world. The other species had already arrived. The exhilarating were forming military lines, their weapons gleaming in the dim light. The Korath were setting up communication equipment, ready to map the land. The Vrok were gathered in a huddle, deep in thought, planning their next steps. They all glanced at the humans with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Why aren't they afraid? One of the exhilarating muttered under his breath. They're acting like this is just another day. A Korath warrior whispered, eyeing the humans. Harper overheard and turned to Ethan. They're worried, they're terrified, and they haven't even faced the first challenge. Ethan grinned. Let them. It's their first time in a real survival test. We're the Deathworlders. This is what we do. As the Zathari's voice echoed through the air, announcing the start of the universal trial, the humans moved with calm confidence. The trial was ready to begin. And as the Tethrics, Korath, and Vrelk steeled themselves for the unknown, the humans stood tall, laughing. The trial had begun, but unlike the other species, the Deathworlders knew something they didn't. They weren't here to survive. They were here to win. The arrival of danger. The first trial began at dawn, a bone-chilling silence falling across the planet's barren landscape. The air was thick with tension as the Zathari, the ancient alien race running the test, activated the trial's starting mechanism. A loud, ominous hum vibrated through the ground, signaling the beginning of the deadly game. All the species, now fully aware of the stakes, braced themselves. At the start, the trial was simple, at least, that's what it seemed. The ground shook as the first obstacle revealed itself, an enormous labyrinth of shifting rocks, treacherous pits, and massive boulders that seemed to move on their own. It was a deadly maze, designed to confuse, trap, and slow down even the fastest of creatures. And it was the first test all the species would face. The Exhilarating, quick to react, charged forward without hesitation. Their sharp claws scraped against the stone walls as they navigated through the maze. They were fast, powerful, and had an incredible sense of smell, which they used to avoid hidden traps. But even they weren't immune to the dangers lurking within the maze. A massive boulder fell from above, barely missing a group of Exhilarating who scrambled to avoid the deadly rock. They growled in frustration, realizing that brute strength alone wouldn't win them this trial. The Korath, with their highly logical minds, were taking a different approach. Their engineers and strategists quickly set to work, analyzing the shifting paths, calculating the safest routes. They tried to work together to avoid traps and hazards, but the maze kept changing, as if it had a mind of its own. The Korath were forced to rely on their technology, using scanners and sensors to find hidden passages. But the more they advanced, the more they realized the maze's true nature. It was alive. The rocks moved as if they were being controlled by some unseen force, and even the Korath's best technology couldn't keep up. The Vrelk, known for their intelligence, took a different path entirely. Instead of relying on speed or strength, they turned inward, trying to solve the maze's riddles. The labyrinth was not just physical, it was psychological. Its twisting corridors seemed to mess with the Vrelk's minds, causing confusion and doubt. The Vrelk were used to intellectual challenges, but this was a different kind of test. They began to question themselves, unsure whether they were solving the maze or simply falling deeper into its traps. Meanwhile, the Deathworlders, humans, were moving forward with ease. The Deathworlders didn't have the advantage of the sharp claws of the Tethrax, the high-tech gadgets of the Korath, or the advanced intellect of the Vrelk. What they did have, however, was something that none of the other species had: a deep understanding of survival. Captain Ethan Walker led his team confidently through the maze. His sharp eyes scanned the surroundings, watching for any subtle changes in the environment. His team, each member chosen for their skills in survival, followed his lead without question. Every human soldier moved with purpose, using their instincts to navigate the shifting maze. One of the soldiers, Private Carter, spoke quietly as they moved forward. "I don't understand. Why are we not running into all these traps? The others are struggling. We should be too." Ethan smiled, though his eyes never left the path ahead. "The key is to stay calm. The maze is designed to confuse us, to make us panic. But if you stay focused, it's just another obstacle. We've faced worse on Earth." The other species were still struggling, their leaders barking orders in desperation. The Exhilarating were pushing forward aggressively, but were too often tripped up by sudden shifts in the path. The Korath kept trying to calculate and analyze, but every time they thought they had a solution, the maze would change again, rendering their efforts useless. The Vrelk, on the other hand, had begun to argue amongst themselves, their minds overwhelmed by the maze's psychological tricks. It was clear the Deathworlders had something the others didn't: experience in navigating chaos, in surviving the unpredictable. The maze might have been designed to defeat them, but humans knew how to adapt. They didn't let fear control them. They had faced trials far worse than this, and so they pushed forward, moving deeper into the labyrinth. As they advanced, the walls seemed to shift even faster, but the humans never lost their composure. With every turn, every new obstacle, they found a way to adapt, always one step ahead. It wasn't about brute strength or intelligence. It was about survival, and the Deathworlders excelled at it. As they neared the center of the labyrinth, the challenge only grew harder. The walls began to close in on them, forcing them to squeeze through narrow gaps. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of decay, and the ground began to tremble beneath their feet. It was as if the maze was coming alive, trying to crush them. But Ethan remained calm. "This is it. We're almost there." His words were a signal to his team, who moved with renewed focus. They had reached the heart of the maze, a small clearing where a glowing orb floated in the center. It was the prize of the first challenge. To survive the maze and reach the orb meant success. But the real test wasn't the orb. It was what came next. The Deathworlders reached it first. The glowing orb seemed to pulse with energy as they approached. For a moment, the other species watched in disbelief. How had the humans made it through so easily? Had they known something the others didn't? And then, a voice echoed across the landscape. It was the Zatheri, their cold tones sending a chill through the air. "The first challenge has been completed. But be warned, it was only the beginning." The alien encounter. The hum of the trial system slowly died down, leaving behind an eerie silence. The challenge was far from over, and the Deathworlders had barely caught their breath before the next obstacle was revealed. The maze they had just conquered seemed like a mere warm-up now, as the Zatheri's cold voice echoed again, announcing the next stage of the trial. "The trial of strength begins now. Face your greatest adversary." As the words faded, the ground trembled beneath their feet. A deep rumble vibrated through the planet's surface, and the air grew thick with tension. The humans, though exhausted from their previous efforts, remained steady and focused. They exchanged brief glances, acknowledging the challenge ahead. If there was one thing they knew, it was how to face danger head-on. From the distant horizon, an enormous figure emerged. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, an alien beast of colossal proportions, towering over the Deathworlders like a mountain. Its body was armored in thick, spiked scales, and its eyes glowed with an eerie green hue. It moved slowly but with terrifying power, each step shaking the ground beneath it. The creature's jagged fangs were easily visible, each one as large as a human leg. The other species, who had already reached the clearing, took a step back in awe. The Xethrax hissed, their claws flexing in anticipation. The Korath quickly started scanning the creature with their devices, while the Vrelk kept their distance, speaking in hushed tones among themselves. None of them were willing to engage the beast directly. It was clear that this was no ordinary creature. It wasn't just strong. It was built for destruction. It had been sent by the Zatheri to test their ability to fight, to survive against an enemy they could barely comprehend. But the Deathworlders, they were already moving. Captain Ethan Walker stepped forward, the crackle of his weapon charging in the quiet air. The soldiers behind him readied their own weapons, a mix of energy guns and knives. Ethan knew what had to be done. "Form up. Stay in formation. Watch your flanks. And don't panic. We're going to take this thing down." His voice rang with authority, and there was no hesitation in the soldiers as they followed his orders. Despite the size of the alien creature, the humans moved swiftly and confidently. They had dealt with beasts on their own planet far fiercer than this one. This alien creature was just another challenge, just another test to pass. Private Carter, the young soldier who had questioned the maze earlier, looked up at the towering beast. He swallowed, his grip tightening around his weapon. "You really think we can take that down, sir?" he asked, voice tight with both fear and excitement. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "If we don't, it'll take us down." He looked around at his team, seeing the same determination in their eyes. "We fight, or we die. But I'm not about to die here." With a synchronized motion, the Deathworlders moved into position. They had trained for this. Their tactics were simple but effective: divide, strike, and never let the enemy get too close. One soldier, Sergeant Thompson, led a small group of soldiers to flank the creature, while another group moved to distract it from the front. Ethan and Carter would engage directly. The beast roared, an earth-shaking sound that echoed across the landscape, shaking the very sky. It swung its massive claws at the humans, each swipe sending shockwaves of force through the ground. But the Deathworlders were quick, dodging and weaving around the creature with practiced precision. They fired their weapons, but the beast's armor was thick and seemingly impenetrable. Ethan grinned. This was exactly what he had been waiting for. The humans weren't fighting out of sheer power. They were fighting with strategy and knowledge. They had no choice but to think quickly, adapt to the creature's patterns, and strike when the time was right. As the beast lunged at Sergeant Thompson's group, trying to crush them beneath its enormous claws, Carter shouted, "Now!" The signal had been given. In an instant, the Deathworlders acted. Ethan and Carter moved as one, darting forward to strike at the creature's exposed underbelly, where the armor seemed weaker. With expert precision, they unleashed a barrage of high-powered blasts into the creature's soft spots. The beast howled in pain, but it wasn't enough to stop it. But the Deathworlders didn't stop there. They knew that brute force alone wouldn't work. Carter used a grenade launcher, firing an explosive device directly at the beast's head. The explosion caused the alien to stagger, throwing up a cloud of smoke and debris. For a moment, the beast seemed disoriented. That was all the humans needed. Ethan barked orders, and the team moved in close, their weapons now aimed at the creature's most vulnerable points. They attacked in unison, relentlessly, with all their skill and training. The creature stumbled, weakened by the precision strikes. Its massive form teetered before it collapsed, falling to the ground with an earth-shattering crash. The silence that followed was almost deafening. The other species stood in shock, watching as the Deathworlders had brought down the beast. It was clear that none of them had expected the humans to defeat the creature so easily. The Sithrex looked to one another, muttering in disbelief. The Koref stood frozen, unable to comprehend how this could have happened. The Vrelk were silent, their faces a mix of awe and fear. But the Deathworlders didn't celebrate. They didn't cheer. They were professionals, and this was just another battle. Captain Walker surveyed the fallen beast, his mind already calculating their next move. "Move out," he said, his voice steady. "We're not done yet. This was just a warm-up. Keep your focus. There's more ahead." As the humans walked past the other species, their steps purposeful, a single thought echoed in their minds. If they could survive this, nothing could stop them. The Zathari's voice rang out once more, and the air was thick with anticipation as the next phase of the trial was about to begin. The reckoning. The mighty roar of the beast still echoed in the distance, but the Deathworlders didn't look back. They kept their eyes forward, knowing the true challenge had only just begun. The alien creature lay defeated, its body crumpled in the dust, but that wasn't the end of the trial. The Zathari had warned them, and they had yet to face what was truly waiting for them. As the humans moved through the rocky terrain, their senses on high alert, a cold, metallic voice sliced through the air. Impressive. But now, the real test begins. The Zathari's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if the very planet itself was alive, watching, judging. The ground beneath the humans' feet began to rumble again, this time with more intensity. Suddenly, the rocks around them shifted, opening up like the jaws of a massive predator. Large stone doors slid apart, revealing an underground passage that seemed to lead into the bowels of the planet itself. Without hesitation, Ethan signaled to his team. "This way. Stay sharp, everyone." They entered the dark passage, the sound of their boots echoing off the walls. The temperature dropped immediately, the air thick and damp. Despite their previous victory, the soldiers knew that their journey had just taken a darker turn. They weren't in a maze anymore. This was something else, something far more dangerous. The passage seemed endless. The walls closed in, and every twist and turn only made the humans feel more isolated, cut off from the outside world. But the Deathworlders were used to this. They had trained for every possible scenario. They had survived worse on Earth. Still, there was something different about this place. It felt alive, as though the very ground beneath them was watching, testing, waiting for them to make a mistake. As they ventured deeper, the walls began to glow with an eerie, greenish light, revealing strange symbols etched into the rock. The Zathari had always been cryptic, but now their meaning was clearer. This wasn't just a physical test. The trial was about their minds, their ability to overcome not only physical challenges but mental ones as well. The Deathworlders couldn't simply fight their way through this one. Private Carter, always the curious one, pointed to the symbols. "What do you think they mean, sir?" Ethan didn't take his eyes off the path ahead. "We're about to find out." The further they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The passage seemed to narrow, the air becoming thinner, harder to breathe. And then, out of nowhere, a new sound reached their ears. A low, rumbling growl echoed through the passage. The humans froze, their weapons drawn instinctively. Suddenly, from the shadows ahead, a group of alien creatures emerged. These were no ordinary beasts. They were sleek and fast, with sharp, angular features and glowing red eyes. Their skin was a dark, mottled color, and they moved with unnatural speed, closing in on the humans before they could even react. The creatures attacked in unison, moving so quickly that they almost seemed like one entity, an extension of each other. Ethan's instincts kicked in immediately. "Spread out. Take them down," he commanded. The humans moved with precision, each soldier executing their combat training flawlessly. Private Carter dove to the side, firing a burst of shots that struck one of the creatures in the chest. The beast screeched but didn't slow down. Another one lunged at Sergeant Thompson, its sharp claws scraping across his armor. He gritted his teeth and swung a powerful punch, knocking the creature back. The creatures were fast, but they were not invincible. The Deathworlders' weapons, though not as advanced as some of the alien technology around them, were deadly in the hands of skilled soldiers. With each coordinated strike, one of the creatures fell. But for every beast they killed, two more seemed to take its place. "This isn't stopping," Private Carter shouted as he fired again, his face set in determination. "How many are there?" Ethan's eyes scanned the dark tunnel, realizing that the creatures weren't coming from the walls. They were pouring in from the shadows. It was as though the very darkness of the passage itself was spawning them. "They're endless," Harper said, gritting her teeth. "We have to get out of here." But Ethan didn't agree. This wasn't about retreating. The trial had never been about running. The humans had come here to prove that they were stronger than anything the Zathari could throw at them. They wouldn't back down now. "No, we fight. We take them down, every last one. If they keep coming, we'll keep fighting." With renewed determination, the humans pressed forward. Before they could approach, a voice rang out, louder and more commanding than before. "Congratulations, you have survived the first phase. But beware, taking the Zathari crystal is no simple feat. Only those who prove themselves worthy will live to see the next trial." A cold shiver ran down Ethan's spine. The Zathari weren't done with them yet. The Deathworlders stood before the pedestal, their weapons still in hand, knowing the worst was yet to come. The final test. The Zathari crystal glowed with a sickly green light, casting strange shadows across the chamber. It pulsed as though alive, almost beckoning the Deathworlders to come closer. Ethan's team stood at the edge of the vast chamber, their weapons drawn and their eyes fixed on the glowing object. The air was thick with tension, and every soldier knew that the next move could be their last. Captain Ethan Walker was the first to break the silence. He had been through too much, fought too hard not to finish this trial. "We take it," he said, his voice unwavering. "We're not leaving without it." The others nodded, their faces grim but determined. They had come this far. The Zathari had thrown everything they could at them, but the Deathworlders had survived. The prize at the center of the room was a symbol of that survival. But as Ethan stepped forward, the chamber began to tremble. The ground shook beneath their feet, sending small stones tumbling from the walls. The air grew colder, and the green glow from the crystal seemed to intensify, casting eerie reflections on the walls. It was as if the very chamber itself was reacting to their presence, aware that they were about to claim its most coveted prize. Then a voice echoed, deep and commanding. "You think you are worthy to take the Zathari crystal?" The voice came from nowhere and everywhere at once, and it sent a chill through the group. The Zathari weren't just observing, they were testing. The crystal wasn't just an object, it was a challenge in itself. The Deathworlders didn't flinch. They had been tested time and time again, and they had always risen to the occasion. "We've made it this far," Sergeant Thompson said, stepping forward beside Ethan. "What's one more test?" Ethan nodded. "Stay alert. This isn't over." With a sharp motion, he stepped toward the pedestal, but the instant his hand reached out to touch the Zathari crystal, a loud crack split the air. The ground beneath them buckled and cracked open, as though the very planet itself was about to split apart. From the rift in the earth, massive tendrils of energy shot upward, twisting and writhing like serpents. The Zathari crystal seemed to be feeding the energy, its glow brighter and more dangerous by the second. The tendrils twisted toward the humans, seeking to ensnare them. The room plunged into chaos. "Get back," Ethan shouted. He dove forward, grabbing Carter by the arm and pulling him out of the way of the nearest tendril. The others quickly scattered, firing at the energy tendrils with everything they had. But the energy just absorbed their blasts, and the tendrils grew longer, faster. Carter fired at one of the tendrils, but the blast only seemed to make it more furious. It lashed toward him, and he barely had time to roll out of the way. "It's not working," he yelled, panting. "We need to destroy the source," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "The crystal, it's feeding the energy. If we can shut it down, we stop this." But the tendrils were relentless. They coiled around the soldiers, smashing against the walls, and sent shockwaves through the air with every strike. The ground beneath them buckled again, sending a fresh wave of debris toward them. The Deathworlders were struggling, fighting for every inch of ground, but they knew they couldn't last long like this. They needed to end this, and they needed to do it fast. Ethan scanned the chamber, his mind racing. There had to be a way to neutralize the crystal. He remembered something. The symbols they had seen earlier in the passage. Those symbols, they weren't just decoration. They were instructions for the crystal. He needed to decipher them before it was too late. "Harper, take point. Everyone else, cover us," Ethan ordered, his eyes fixed on the symbols that lined the walls near the pedestal. Harper, a sharpshooter with nerves of steel, nodded without hesitation. She sprinted toward the pedestal, her rifle trained on the tendrils to keep them at bay. Ethan moved swiftly, his eyes darting between the symbols and the energy surging from the crystal. Come on," Ethan muttered, scanning the symbols with rapid precision. He saw the pattern emerge. This was a fail-safe mechanism. The symbols acted as a kind of lock, and the Zathari had hidden its key in plain sight. Ethan made a quick move, pressing his hand against the wall where the symbols seemed to align. The walls hummed, and a low, deep vibration ran through the chamber as if the entire planet was reacting to his touch. Suddenly, the tendrils froze. The crystal pulsed, its light dimming, and the room fell silent, as though time itself had slowed. The Zathari's voice rang out again, more sinister than before. "You have unlocked the secret. But do you truly believe you have won?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "We're just getting started." With a final push, he activated the mechanism hidden within the symbols. The entire chamber shook as the energy from the Zathari crystal surged toward the pedestal, but it wasn't destructive this time. Instead, the energy seemed to be absorbed back into the crystal. Slowly, the tendrils retracted, and the earth beneath their feet stopped shaking. The threat had been neutralized. The Zathari's voice fell silent. The Deathworlders stood, breathing heavily but victorious. Ethan stepped forward and placed his hand on the Zathari crystal. A final test had been passed. The chamber had fallen quiet, the energy dissipated, and the crystal's glow had dulled. But the Deathworlders had not only survived, they had earned their victory. But the Zathari weren't done yet. A cold final warning echoed from the walls. "You may have proven yourselves worthy of the first trial, Deathworlders, but know this: the trials will never stop. The galaxy is not ready for your kind, but one day you will face something you cannot defeat." Ethan turned toward his team, his expression resolute. "We'll be ready. Whatever comes next, we face it together." As the Deathworlders left the chamber, the Zathari's words lingered in the air, heavy with promise. The true war had just begun, the hidden war. The Deathworlders stood at the entrance of the chamber, their weapons still drawn, their bodies aching from the trial they had just survived. The Zathari crystal now lay in Ethan's hands, its ominous glow faded to a dull shimmer. But the weight of the Zathari's warning hung in the air like a storm cloud. "They're not done with us," Ethan said quietly, his voice low and steady. His team had heard the Zathari's words, and each of them understood what it meant. The Zathari were only the beginning. They had passed this trial, but the galaxy was vast, and the challenges ahead would be far greater. "Let's move," Captain Walker ordered, his tone brokering no argument. They had no choice but to keep going. The team moved through the corridors of the Zathari facility, stepping carefully. Every corner could be hiding another test, another trap. The walls, once silent, seemed to hum with a low vibration, the sound of the Zathari's presence still lingering. The air around them was thick, almost suffocating, as if the planet itself was trying to keep them from escaping. As they neared the exit of the Zathari's underground structure, a sudden noise stopped them in their tracks. A low, grinding sound echoed from behind them. They spun around, weapons raised, but there was nothing there, just the sound, growing louder. And then, out of nowhere, the walls around them shifted. The corridor was closing in, the walls grinding together, pushing inward. The Deathworlders had no time to think, only to act. "Move. Go. Now," Ethan shouted, his voice sharp with urgency. They sprinted forward, the walls closing behind them with alarming speed. The air grew colder and the gravity shifted, making their movements heavier. The escape had become a race against time. But as they turned a corner, they were met with another surprise. The exit, the path to freedom, was blocked by an impenetrable force field. "No," Carter shouted, slamming his fist against the invisible barrier. "We're trapped." "We need to deactivate it," Harper said, her eyes scanning the surroundings. "Find the control room. Now." Ethan took charge once again, his mind already working out the next steps. "Harper, Carter, check the walls. The rest of you, cover them. We don't have much time." The team spread out, quickly moving to investigate the control systems hidden within the walls. The Zathari hadn't made this easy, of course. The room was a labyrinth of technology and alien engineering, and the Deathworlders had no idea how the system worked. They had only one choice: brute force and instinct. "We've got about 5 minutes before we're crushed," Sergeant Thompson said, his voice tight with both urgency and experience. He had seen the worst in battle, but the walls closing in now felt different. This was no longer a test, it was a trap. Carter knelt beside the nearest control panel, fiddling with the wires and alien interfaces. "Come on, come on," he muttered under his breath as sparks flew from the wires. "There has to be something here." The seconds ticked away, each one feeling heavier than the last. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't show it. There was no room for panic. They had survived worse, and they would survive this, too. Suddenly, Carter's voice broke through the tension. "Got it. The force field's down." There was a click, followed by a sharp hiss of air as the force field flickered and died. The team wasted no time. They bolted for the exit, the walls still closing behind them. The final stretch was a blur of motion, adrenaline fueling their every step. Just as they reached the door, the walls closed behind them with a loud crash, leaving the team in the dim light of the Zathari's final chamber. The rumbling of the walls faded, and the air, thick with the stench of danger, finally began to settle. They were out, barely. But now they faced a different kind of challenge. They had survived the Zathari's trials, but the galaxy was vast, and its threats were limitless. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow, his face set in determination. "We've made it this far, but the hardest part's yet to come." The Deathworlders, now outside the Zathari facility, looked around. The landscape was barren, a rocky wasteland that stretched as far as the eye could see. No sign of civilization, no comfort, just the unknown. The planet was dead. Its trials had ended, but the real war had just begun. And it wasn't just the Zathari they had to worry about. The galaxy was full of enemies who would come after them, knowing now that Deathworlders were more than just a species to be conquered. They were a threat, one that would rise to challenge every power that sought to crush them. "We've got the crystal," Harper said, glancing at Ethan. "But that's just one piece of the puzzle. What now?" Ethan looked at the Zathari crystal in his hand. Its glow had faded, but it still held an undeniable power. The Zathari's voice rang in his mind again, the final warning clear. "You may have proven yourselves worthy of the first trial, but know this, the galaxy is not ready for your kind." "We find answers," Ethan said, his voice calm but resolute. "And we make sure the galaxy never forgets what happens when they underestimate us." With that, the Deathworlders began their trek through the desolate landscape, knowing that what lay ahead was far more dangerous than anything they had faced so far. The real war was just beginning, and the universe had no idea what was about to hit it. The Deathworlders were no longer a species to be ignored. They were the reckoning, and the galaxy would tremble before them. The war begins. The Deathworlders walked in silence, their every step heavy with the weight of the journey ahead. Behind them, the Zathari facility loomed, a dark, silent testament to the trial they had just endured. But the true challenge lay ahead, far beyond the broken walls and the now empty corridors. The galaxy would not forget the death of the Zathari trial, and the Deathworlders knew they had earned the attention of forces far more powerful than anything they had faced so far. They had proven themselves worthy of the Zathari's trials, but now they would need to prove themselves worthy of the galaxy's wrath. Captain Ethan Walker led his team across the barren landscape, the weight of the Zathari crystal still in his hand. Its faint glow illuminated their path, but the crystal felt heavier than ever. It wasn't just a piece of technology, it was a symbol of the power the Deathworlders now wielded, and the target they had painted on their backs. "This is only the beginning," Sergeant Thompson said as he walked beside Ethan, his eyes scanning the desolate horizon. "We're not just fighting the Zathari anymore. We're going to have every major power in the galaxy gunning for us." Ethan nodded. He knew what Thompson meant. The Deathworlders weren't just a species that had survived a trial. They had defeated the Zathari, and the Zathari were not a race to be underestimated. They were ancient and powerful, their technology unmatched by anything the galaxy had seen in centuries. And yet, the Deathworlders had walked out of their trial alive, taking the very heart of the Zathari's power with them. It wouldn't take long for others to notice. "Let them come," Ethan said, his voice steady. "We'll be ready." The team walked for hours, the barren terrain stretching on endlessly. There was no sign of life, no vegetation. The planet had been abandoned long ago, the signs of a once thriving world now just faded memories. It was as though the Zathari themselves had vanished, leaving behind only the cold, lifeless shell of a forgotten empire. But despite the emptiness, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. They had made it through the Zathari's trials, but now the universe was silent. No ships, no signals, nothing. It was as though the galaxy was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable to unfold. And then, as if on cue, the silence was broken. A distant, eerie hum filled the air, followed by a flicker of light in the sky. Ethan's hand instinctively went to his weapon. "What the hell is that?" The rest of the team fell into a defensive posture, scanning the sky for any signs of danger. The hum grew louder, the flickering light brighter, until it was unmistakable. A fleet. The sky above them was suddenly filled with massive ships, dark, imposing, and bristling with weapons. The silhouette of each ship was jagged and angular, like something designed for destruction. They were Zathari warships, hundreds of them. "It's them. The Zathari's backup," Harper whispered, her eyes wide with shock. "They're coming for us." Ethan's heart sank, but his resolve only grew stronger. "No, this is something else. This isn't just the Zathari. This is the galaxy responding." The fleet overhead grew larger, its presence overwhelming. The Deathworlders had only just left the Zathari trial, and now the full force of the galaxy's most powerful factions were descending upon them. They had come to make sure the Deathworlders were wiped out before they could become a real threat. But the Deathworlders weren't going to go down quietly. Ethan raised his hand, signaling the team to fall back into formation. They had to fight now. There was no escape. "Take cover. Now," Ethan ordered. The team quickly took positions behind the craggy rocks, their weapons at the ready. The ships above them began to move in formation, their engines rumbling as they prepared to strike. But it was too late for them to have the element of surprise. The Deathworlders had faced worse odds, and they had come out on top. Now, they would show the galaxy exactly what they were made of. Ethan turned to his team. "Listen up. We've got one shot at this. We can't let them take the crystal. If we go down, we take as many of them with us as we can. No mercy." The team nodded, their expressions hardening. They had fought for their lives against the Zathari. Now they would fight for something greater, their place in the galaxy. The galaxy that had once underestimated them. The first ship broke through the cloud cover, its guns primed and ready. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the heat rising in his veins. "Fire!" he shouted, and the world erupted in chaos. The Deathworlders unleashed a storm of firepower, their weapons crackling with deadly energy. The Zathari ships retaliated almost immediately, their weapons blazing as they rained fire down upon the surface. But the Deathworlders were relentless. They fought with a fury that could only come from those who had nothing left to lose. Their training, their experience, their will to survive, it all came to bear in that moment. The first wave of ships was taken down with shocking precision, the Deathworlders' firepower overwhelming the Zathari's defenses. But more ships were coming, and the battle was only just beginning. The sky above them became a war zone, lit up with explosions and laser fire. The Deathworlders didn't flinch. They fought with everything they had, using the terrain to their advantage, hiding in the shadows and striking when the enemy least expected it. Every move they made was calculated, every shot fired with purpose. They were more than just soldiers, they were warriors, born from a world where survival meant everything. As the battle raged on, the Deathworlders pushed forward, their determination unwavering. They weren't just fighting for their lives. They were fighting for their future, for a galaxy that would soon learn to fear them. Finally, after what felt like hours, the last of the Zathuri ships fell from the sky, their hulking forms crashing to the ground in massive explosions. The dust settled, and the silence returned, but this time it wasn't the quiet of defeat. It was the silence of victory. Ethan stood amidst the wreckage, his chest heaving with exertion. His team was battered but alive, their weapons still smoking from the intense battle. They had won, this round, at least. But the Zathuri's warning echoed in his mind, and he knew this was just the beginning. The galaxy was watching. The war had only just started, and they were ready. The Deathworlders had made their mark, and now the galaxy would learn what it meant to face the deadliest species the universe had ever seen.